All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. My name is Kayla Giordano. I am a senior manager at the Partnership for Strong Communities. I'm also joined in this session by my colleague Danielle Hubley. I am very, very excited to be introducing this session titled Lessons for New Leaders, Six Stories from Connecticut Housing Changemakers. There is an all-star lineup of speakers over the next hour. I am very excited to hear and learn from all of them. I do want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this session, Elm City Communities, the New Haven Housing Authority, as well as all of the sponsors that make our housing conference possible every year. And now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Johnny.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kayla. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining this session. My name is Johnny Shively, and I'm the Housing Policy Manager at Elm City Communities in New Haven. I'm excited to be here today. In my work, I think a lot about what is needed to create systemic change. And I feel that in many professional spaces, stories are an underutilized tool for making things happen. Obviously, housing advocates use stories all the time to inform and persuade, but stories are also a powerful tool for connecting at a human level with other people, something that I believe is fundamental in any change-making process. And so a year ago at this very conference, I was in a breakout room with the amazing Carla Weil, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes. And I don't actually remember what the prompt for that breakout room was, but I do remember connecting over our shared desire for a space where experienced housing leaders in the state of Connecticut could share some of the stories that have shaped them over the courses of their lives and their careers. And so now, a year later, here we are. We gave housing leaders from across the state some simple prompts and offered them free rein to tell the stories they think the next generation of housing leaders should know. Um, and that's what you're going to hear. So, here is a quick summary of what we're going to do today. For the first half of this session, we're going to hear short stories from our incredible lineup of storytellers. I have not heard these stories yet, so you and I will be hearing them together for the very first time. And then in the second half of this event, we're going to get out into breakout rooms and actually give you a chance to practice telling a short story of your own. This is not meant to be intimidating, although I acknowledge that storytelling is an act that requires bravery and vulnerability. But we'll give you a short list of prompts to help you out. And if the task of telling a story sounds daunting to you, or if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds like a great time to go grab a cup of coffee. I really encourage you to challenge yourself to tell a story, even one that feels small or insignificant, because stories are the building blocks, in my opinion, of relationships. Relationships are the building blocks of change. And if we want to be effective change makers, we have to practice telling our stories. So just start preparing yourself for maybe telling a story in the second half of this session. So, with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump in and hear from our very first storyteller. We have Nandini Natarajan, who is Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, the state housing finance agency for Connecticut. Nandini is the first woman CEO in the organization's history, and since joining CHFA in 2019, Nandini has focused on expanding access to affordable housing through practical program development, strong financial stewardship, and a commitment to public service. There's a lot more that we could say about Nandini, but I'm going to leave it to her to tell her own story. So, Nandini, without any further ado, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound clear.
Okay. Have you ever felt that there was one moment that changed your life forever? For me, that was a call I took in 2014 from a good friend that, in retrospect, launched my career in public service. I had spent years preparing for that call, and yet when that call came, I was wholly unprepared. It was an opportunity, really, of a lifetime. and it was to head up a state housing finance agency as their chief financial officer. And it would be recreating myself and my career. Ultimately, after many conversations with loved ones, I took the leap that eventually has brought me here before you today. But as with most things, the story begins well before that phone call. I grew up in India in the city of Calcutta, which is now called Kolkata. It is a teeming, buzzing 15 million people metropolis. Yes, it is densely packed, and that's an understatement. We lived in a flat which was located in a building, and our apartment was 1,000 square feet. It had a balcony, it had two bathrooms, and three small bedrooms. If that sounds pretty luxurious, it was. We were among the growing middle class in India that was going through a period of economic liberalization. However, my father's parents lived with us for a time, and like many cultures where grandparents will live with their children, our grandparents lived with us and would rotate their residence between all of their kids. My grandfather, who was a retired government official, never could afford his own home after retirement. And I remember my grandmother, her deep sadness as she would say to us children, and the words still echo for me. She would say, if only we had our own home. If only we had our own home. Home was a place of refuge, and yet there were many, many people, including my grandparents, who couldn't afford a place of their own. When I moved here as a young adult attending a US college, my first home after graduation was an apartment that cost $400. It's hard to say that because it's so small compared to rent today. It was a large studio within walking distance of a really small, quaint town I lived in. As a young woman trying to make it, I had very little money, and I remember craving my home, my home food. And I remember bologna sandwiches and the like, until I said, you know what? I'm going to learn how to cook. I had never learned how to cook. But somehow, with my cookbook propped up on my kitchen shelf, I spent hours learning technique, really by trial and error, and serving up lots of meals for my friends. And so home was a place of nourishment, both physically and emotionally and spiritually. I drew strength really from the ways in which I connected to my culture through the cuisine. When I was a full-time graduate student, I lived in a pocketbook factory building turned into an apartment building. My first ever adaptive reuse. Every night, I remember at 2 a.m., the Amtrak train roared by my window, about 30 feet away on its way up to Vermont. I was a research assistant and I made very little money and I was rent cost burdened for a time and I took up a second job. And I was a single person. I only had myself to take care of, and yet I didn't have savings and I didn't have a family who I could go live with. And the challenge of keeping myself housed while I was getting educated was one I will never forget. I became a first-time home buyer at the age of 33. We put down roots in a town called Northampton, Massachusetts, which I know many of you are probably familiar with. It was walking distance. It was a small condo, walking distance to downtown. Home was about building community and living in a community of our choice. Our homes have always been stepping stones for us in our journey through this life, supporting our ability to be in school, to better ourselves, to learn a new skill, or change careers even. So I guess what I hope to share with others today through my life experience is that home ownership or home Having home is a deeply personal experience, but it's also a collective mission and a calling. As someone who's been entrusted with housing leadership, my purpose is to open doors to opportunity wide so that more individuals and more families can step through and experience the sense of belonging, security, and hope that having home can bring. So that call I took in 2014 led to my first role in public service, and it was inspired by my personal lived experience of being an immigrant woman trying to find home here in the US. And so my hope is simple, that more people can experience the pride, the peace, and the positivity that having a home has given me.
Thank you, Nandini. Wow. Um, I want to just sit with that story for a second and let it sink in. Um, I see some folks are already using the emojis, but can we get some love for Nandini in the chat? Storytelling is such a vulnerable act. That was some really beautiful storytelling about your own life. So let's uh let's appreciate her for sharing herself with us today. When I was planning this event, uh, we made a decision early on that between stories, we were not going to ask any questions or do a lot of reflections. I knew that was going to be the hardest part of a facilitator because I have so many questions for you, Nandini, that I'm not going to ask today. But yeah,
I'm
thank you
happy to
for
answer them at any other time.
yes, yes. This is a good reason for storytelling because now we'll have something to talk about when I see you in person. Cool. All right, y'all. Well, as much as I want to dig more into this story, we're going to keep going. And I'm going to introduce to you our next storyteller for today, Housing Commissioner Seila Mosquera Bruno. Seila was appointed the Commissioner of Housing for the state of Connecticut by Governor Ned Lamont in 2019 and reappointed for his second term in 2023. As commissioner, Seila leads the state agency responsible for all affordable housing matters, including development, preservation, acquisitions, homeownership, emergency shelter, and homelessness support services. The Department of Housing administers $200 million for homelessness support and more than $800 million for development and preservation of affordable housing. Under Sela's tenure, the agency has developed or preserved more than 14,000 housing units, with over 7,000 currently under construction. But that's all I'm going to say. Sela, I'm going to pass it over to you to tell your story.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Nandini, for that story. I was trying to find my electronic emojis, but I'm challenged by technology. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit of my story with you, the next generation of Connecticut's housing leaders. I feel both hopeful and energized to be here. This is not just my professional story. It is the story of how a young immigrant mother found her purpose in building homes, building communities, and building pathways for others to thrive. I came to the United States from Ecuador when I was 24 years old, and Carla got to know me. With a toddler in my arms and very little else, I didn't know then what my future could hold. But I did know that I had to build a better life for my daughter. Those early years were hard. I worked multiple jobs, struggled with housing insecurity myself, and navigated systems that often felt overwhelming and inaccessible. But the truth is, those challenges became my greatest teachers. They taught me the empathy, they taught me resilience. And somewhere along the way, they lit a fire in me, a belief that safe, stable, and affordable housing should not be a privilege. It should be a foundation, a starting point, a right. My first opportunity to work in community development came through a paid internship. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't sitting in boardrooms or making policy decisions. I was an organizer, knocking on doors, sitting in living rooms, listening to families tell me what they needed. And that's where I discovered what I was meant to do. For more than 20 years, I had the opportunity to serve at NeighborWorks New Horizons, eventually becoming the CEO. We build homes, yes, but more importantly, we build trust. We build stability. We build future for families who had once felt overlooked or forgotten. And then in 2019, Governor Lamont asked me to serve as Connecticut's Commissioner of Housing. That call changed my life, but it didn't change my mission. My job simply grew bigger. Leading the Department of Housing, I have the privilege of working with great staff and incredible partners across the state to expand access to affordable homes, support individuals experiencing homelessness, and create new pathways to homeownership. Programs like Time to Own and Build for CT were born from a simple question: how do we make opportunity possible for people who have been shut out for far too long? During the COVID-19 pandemic, we faced challenges unlike anything we had ever seen. We had to move fast. We had to be bold. And we had to rethink what emergency response and housing stability could look like. Those moments reminded me that in this work, compassion and urgency must go hand in hand. But today is not really about the programs I have worked on or the titles I have held. It is about what I want you to carry forward. First, lead with empathy. Don't ever let data or funding formulas make you forget the people behind them. Every unit represents a family's dignity, safety, and future. Second, be creative. Housing challenges are not solved with old thinking. Don't be afraid to try something new. Challenge the process or design a solution that no one has tried yet. Third, collaborate. Housing touches everything: education, healthcare, the workforce, transportation. Works across systems. Build bridges, not silos. And finally, I believe in the power of your own story. I never imagined that I, a young mother from Ecuador, who started with nothing, would one day become Connecticut's Commissioner of Housing. But every step of my journey prepared me to serve. So wherever your story begins, whether you come from hardship, privilege, or somewhere in between, know this: your experiences give you the perspective to lead with purpose. Use them. The future of housing in Connecticut depends on leaders who understand that this work is not just about buildings. It is about people, communities, opportunities, hope. I believe in you, and I cannot wait to see what you build next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Can we please get some appreciation for Commissioners Mosquera Bruno in the chat and in the emojis? I I feel like with someone who is such a public figure, it's always easy to forget that there is a real person behind the policies, the programs, the decisions. So I really appreciate this chance to hear more about your story and what leads you to this work. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. We're going to keep this agenda moving by bringing up our next storyteller. Before I do, I just wanted to let folks who just joined the session know that at the end of the session, we're going to turn the mic around and give you the chance to tell some of your own personal stories in small breakout rooms. So we'll make it really easy for you, but just start preparing yourself emotionally for the possibility of being vulnerable and telling your story. I'm sure you can already see how impactful that act can be. Um, all right, so our third story today is going to be by Carlene Charmelis. Carlene joined the Partnership for Strong Communities in February 2015 as a policy analyst working to support the Reaching Home campaign. She is now the Collective Impact and Equity Director who directs coordination and provides leadership of Home Connecticut and guides and supports the organization's equity efforts. So I'm going to leave it there for myself. Carlene, please share your story with us.
Yeah, and thank you so much, everyone. And I am hopeful that my voice won't fail me. So I woke up this morning and I had a cold. So I come from an immigrant household, and growing up, homelessness and housing instability were not words that were part of my normal vocabulary. It was not something we often seen people experience in my culture. So imagine at age 15, 3 years after I immigrated to the US from Haiti, I experienced housing instability. I lived with my mom here in Connecticut while my dad lived in New York. At one point, my mom's immigration papers expired and she voluntarily left the country to go secure her permanent residency paperwork that was waiting for her back home. In her absence, the person who was a roommate at that time and whom I was left in their care ended our lease because they feared she would not be able to return to this country. And within 2 weeks after my mom left, I lost my home, and all of our belongings either got lost or got scattered all over friends and extended family's basement. I ended up couch surfing with an extended family because it was in the middle of the school year. And I can still remember the fear and the uncertainty I felt about whether my mom was truly going to come back because everyone was saying she wasn't coming back. And if it was now, that fear would have been elevated by tenfold. And also thinking about whether I had to leave my community and my friends, which as an introvert took a lot of energy to make, and move to New York. And thankfully, my mom was able to sort out her paperwork and come back 2 months later. I was fine. I was resilient. I went to school, which I loved, and I had my friends. But my mom wasn't when she returned. I had never seen my proud, hardworking mother so disheartened until the day she returned to no home, and everything she had worked so hard to build either lost in flooded basements or stolen. It took about 7 months of doubling up and savings before she could afford a studio apartment on top of CAHC stores on Franklin Street in Norwich. And that neighborhood was rapidly degrading at that time, but that was the only area she could afford to find a place to rent. So it was a short-term fix. And it took about 22 months of us being on the Norwich Public Housing Authority waiting list before she could secure a 2-bedroom unit and a Section 8 voucher. Thinking back, we were lucky. Someone took us in and sheltered us for a few months while we got back on our feet. But many people don't have that safety net. All they have is the system, and that needs to be strengthened. And I tell the story because I was there when my mom picked up the pieces. As a child, I'd spent many months combing through apartment listings, calling nonprofit agencies about available resources, calculating expenses, filling out applications on her behalf because she did not speak English well. And I was also learning English, but we made it work. I remember the months of waiting and the despair and loss of hope each month that we waited for a call or a letter from the housing authority to let us know they had an affordable unit available for us. I saw the joy in her eyes when we finally had a place of our own, the relief when she could finally give me my own room back again, and we could decorate it to my liking and having a place for me to invite my friends over. That sense of joy and accomplishment you can only get once you have a choice of where you live and start feeling a sense of stability. We spent 8 years living in the housing authority. I had a lot of firsts living in that unit. My high school graduation, college, graduate school celebration there. And then we moved. And 4 years later, she was able to purchase her own home. That experience made me learn to cherish the things that I have, the people in my life who serve as families and friends. It gave me a deeper understanding that in a blink of an eye, a person can lose everything they've worked for and be left scattered to pick up the pieces or being thrown in a new world that they didn't realize they would ever have to navigate. It made me more empathetic to people's experiences and gave me an understanding that the housing system people need to navigate when they are unexpectedly thrown into housing instability is very slow and often frustrating. And today we have many people who are waiting for that call or that letter, who are constantly reaching out to local organizations to ask if there's any resources available, and case managers who are agonizing over their client situation. There's a family right now in Norwich whose home got caught in a fire a few months ago, and they lost everything in that fire, similar to my mom and I. And they've been living in a hotel, and their short-term subsidies is coming to an end. And they're going to be on the street soon because there's no longer any resources available in the community to support them. And they are priced out of getting a home because they cannot afford an affordable unit. And I had hoped 10 years ago when I started in this field that I would be able to say today that these experiences are few in between, but that's not the case. Over the summer, I had the opportunity to work with a group of young people to educate them about housing policy, advocacy, research, and storytelling, and discuss ways to reimagine and reinvent the system. And I was privileged to hear their stories and experiences and that of their peers about access to safe, stable, and affordable housing in their community. And from what I heard, we got a lot of work to do. So if you are new to this field or you are an emerging leader or even an experienced leader, I would encourage you to spend some time thinking about why this work is important to you, what your commitment to this work looks like. And like my friend Atia says, what is your conditions of satisfaction for this work for yourself, for your organization, and the system at large? And that self-reflection may mean that you may have to pivot. You may have to change your role or learn to work in different ways or work more collaboratively with others. And for me, my condition is that no child should ever have to experience homelessness and housing instability. And that if they do, we have a system and the resources in place to quickly move them to stability. And it doesn't matter if I'm supporting this work from a program standpoint, supporting my team's well-being on the back end as an administrator, or just giving to organizations who are leading the charge. So spend some time today doing that self-reflection. And I just want to say thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Carlene. Can we please get some appreciation for Carlene in the chat, in the emojis? What a beautiful story. And it's so helpful and inspiring to hear, yeah, about how your personal experiences shape the work that you do, and the way that you live your life. Thank you for telling us. I also I don't know if other folks are noticing this, but something that I've noticed about stories is that no matter what the stories are, when you put stories side by side, themes start to emerge. And I'm really seeing some themes from just the three stories that we've heard so far. So I'm learning a lot through that as well. Okay, everyone. We're gonna keep moving on. So our fourth storyteller today is Carla Weil. Uh, as the director of commercial lending and impact, For Capital for Change, Carla oversees multifamily affordable housing and energy efficient lending at C4C, a portfolio of over $60 million. She is also part of the team that works on capitalization for the organization. Carla was the founding executive director of the Greater New Haven Community Loan Fund, where she served for 27 years before joining C4C. Carla grew up with the CDFI industry as it moved from a collaborative group of loan funds into a multi-billion-dollar industry serving the needs, hopes, and well-being of America's disinvested communities and the residents who live there. Carla, the floor is yours. Please tell us your story.
Thank you. I'm awed by the stories that came before me, and those are hard stories to follow. Today, I thought I would talk about my origin story in the CDFI world and the housing world. And as I thought about it, sort of the role that happenstance and opportunity have played for me, and the role of seizing the moment and taking chances. Um, I also have the theme I've heard today is immigration. So I am not an immigrant. I grew up in Greeley, Colorado. I grew up as a bit of an unusual outsider there. My mother came from New York City, and my father was an immigrant from Nazi Germany. He came when he was 8 years old as a refugee. I was the only Jewish kid in most of grade school till my brother got into school behind me, the only one in junior high and high school. I had this strange thought when I was a kid. I used to wonder if I should be grateful for Nazi Germany because without it, my father never would have come to the United States and I never would have been born. So that piece of happenstance always confused me as a kid. My parents were very political, they were very liberal, and they raised my brother and sister and I with a sense that we had experienced privilege and it was our responsibility to give back and to do something for other people. I remember one day watching my dad, he was taking something out of the closet, and I was thinking about this. I said, Dad, what if when I grow up, all the problems are solved? What will I do? And he looked at me and said that I didn't have anything to worry about, that he thought it would be okay. I waited to find my purpose when I was a kid. I waited to be a prodigy at something, music or art or something, but nothing specific came along. Um, I went to school to study environmental studies. I left school, and when I graduated, I went to work for a consulting firm. I worked for a congressman from Minnesota. I lived in DC. And I followed my brother. Again, my brother has a role in much of my life to go to public policy school. I thought I'd study environmental science because that had always been a fascination of mine. But the school was very big on cost benefit analysis. There was lots of talk of what is a human life worth? And it wasn't what I was looking for in that field. So I ended up doing food policy. But the thing that changed my life in a way is I also worked in the computer lab as a work study student. And a friend of mine who I ended up marrying came in and he didn't know computers, but he was doing a pro forma for his development class. So I learned pro formas, he learned computers. And eventually we both moved to New Haven. My first job in New Haven, I got working as a temp at the law librarian's office at Yale. And it was my job to hand out the study carrels, which I met one of the staff person who had taken my job in Washington, D.C. as a student, and one of my fellow students from policy school to whom I was handing out a carrel. And it was a humbling and important experience in thinking about the people that you work with and valuing the people that you work with and not having expectations of who they are and what they bring to the job. While I was there, I saw a listing in something we used to call the want ads in the New Haven Register, and they were looking for a fund manager for the Greater New Haven Community Loan Fund, an organization that had been started by a group of churches in New Haven. In the interview, they asked me if I knew what a pro forma was, and I said, "Well, of course, yes, I've done those." Um, the final interview was 9 or 10 people who were the board asking me if I would make a 2-year commitment to doing this work. They had $25,000 and the rest was up to me. And I told them that I hadn't done anything really after high school for more than 2 years. I went to two different colleges, I had two different jobs, I went to a 2 year grad school, but I thought I could give them a 2 year commitment. And that was in March of 1988. So I stayed on longer. It was a blessing at the time that I didn't know what I didn't know. I had never done a grant request. I didn't raise capital. I didn't know how to talk to bankers. I had never made a loan. But I found the value of collaboration and from finding the people around you that can help you. I had a great board of directors, and the loan fund movement was just starting out, and there was a great collegiality about helping each other out and helping each other learn that business. Um, and I also had the privilege of falling in love with a place. I fell in love with New Haven. I fell in love with the people and the buildings and the history, the neighborhoods, the character of the town. And my life was enriched by all the people that I met, the developers especially. Developers are a special kind of person. They are resolutely optimistic in the face of everything that says they shouldn't be. Most of the ones I met at that time were men, and I had to prove myself to them. I had to prove that I knew what I was doing. And in fact, the commissioner was the first female developer that I ever worked with. She was a trendsetter at the time. So over the 40 years that I have been doing this work, or almost 40 years, it's been a study of the successes that you can gain by working with your partners and with other agencies, successes on a day-to-day basis that are always in the face of these wider forces of society that seem to be working against you. We all make a difference, everybody on this call, in the day-to-day lives of individuals, even though on a larger scale those problems persist. During the time that I worked, we had to deal with the crack epidemic of the 90s and the savings and loan crisis and the foreclosure crisis, and now we're confronting another crisis in front of us. And on the one hand, I can look back and feel discouraged, all the work that you do, and sometimes you feel it doesn't come to anything because you're having to fight the same fight again. But I see it differently. I see it as a story of persistence, the persistence of the people like everyone on this call who are committed to doing the good works and to fighting the good fight. And we have to seize the moment and believe in the ability to make change. We have to find the allies that are all sitting here that can work to do that work with us. And as I said in the beginning, that the three women who we already just heard from, I mean, these are the allies that we have to work with. And despite the forces against us, there is a lot to hope for in the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carla. Can we hear some love in the chat for Carla and her bravery in sharing that story? How beautiful. Yeah, Carla, it's every time we talk, I learn a little bit more about your history and what the reflections that you bring into this work. So thanks for sharing some of what you've learned and what you've noticed.
Thank you for asking.
Okay, everyone. Well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we're actually at our last storyteller for the day. Um, uh, if you're keeping track, the session is titled Six Storytellers. This is our fifth storyteller. Unfortunately, one of our storytellers is not able to be here. But the next story is going to be so amazing that you're not even going to notice. And when the story is finished, don't hop off because we're going to spend the last few minutes of the session in small breakout rooms. We're actually going to give all of you a chance to tell your stories too. And if that sounds daunting or something like you want to skip, I would really encourage you to hang around and challenge yourself to engage in the vulnerable act of storytelling because there's a lot that can come out of it. But enough of me talking. I'm going to introduce our final speaker for the day, Brandon McGee, who is a community activist, an architect of social solutions, and a small business owner, as well as a former legislator in Connecticut. Brandon was a candidate for mayor of Hartford and also served as the deputy commissioner for the Connecticut Department of Housing. Currently, he holds the position of chief executive officer at the Connecticut Social Equity Council. Although his title and agency have changed, his dedication to promoting equity and opportunity remains steadfast. The council was established to encourage equitable economic prosperity by supporting social equity entrepreneurs and reinvesting in communities that have been most affected by the war on drugs. And Brandon, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Good afternoon, Connecticut. And thank you, Johnny. Thank you to all of our sponsors and the amazing activists and developers and students in this space. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be in the space with our commissioner, who has now become my mentor in this space. So just hearing all the stories, I'm like, oh, y'all can keep talking. I don't need to say anything. But it's an honor to be here, not just as a policymaker, not just as the former, deputy housing commissioner, not just as a community organizer, but as a son of this state, a child of Hartford's North End, a kid raised in the historic Westbrook Village apartments, where community wasn't something you talked about, it was something you lived. And so today I want to discuss place, self, and community. But y'all know me. I'm going to weave them all together because we all know in Connecticut, you can't separate the history of a neighborhood from the people who carry it. And you can't talk about housing without talking about education, opportunity, and the systems that shape both. So I wish more people in housing understood this. And if you're taking notes, write this down. Connecticut's neighborhoods didn't evolve by accident. They were shaped by policy. Policy that dictated who could live where, policy that decided which children got access to strong schools, policy that treated some places as investments and others as afterthoughts. Growing up in Westbrook Village, before it was demolished, thanks to the Department of Housing and so many other folks, I saw firsthand what it meant for a place to hold both struggle and pride. We had big families, bigger hearts, and a community that truly raised its children, including myself. But I also watched as the surrounding systems, like transportation, schools, zoning, reinforced invisible lines that said opportunity lived over there, while the rest of us were bused miles away to find it. And yes, I was one of those kids. Every single morning at 5:30, I boarded a bus out of Hartford to attend schools in other communities. And although I received a strong education, lasting friendships were established, the message was clear. Opportunity required leaving home. And this is the part of Connecticut's housing story we don't talk about enough. Educational access and housing access are intertwined. If you want stable classrooms, you need stable housing. If you want thriving neighborhoods, you must invest in people who call those neighborhoods home. Now let's imagine Connecticut in 2065. I know that seems like it's so far away, but it really isn't, y'all. A Connecticut where we've dismantled those invisible lines. A Connecticut where families don't have to leave their neighborhood to find a good school. A Connecticut where Westbrook Village isn't just remembered as a lost community, but as a blueprint for reinvestment, where affordability, opportunity, and dignity aren't competing values. but the standard. We get to that future when we stop operating from a place of scarcity and start building with intention. When we stop asking, how cheap can we build, and start asking, how dignified can people live, I got to tell you, there's a lot to look forward to. People always ask all the time, Brandon, what made you care about housing? And the short answer is my childhood. The long answer, the bus I rode every single morning at 5 a.m. You can't grow up in places like Westbrook Village, travel out of your community for school, and not notice the difference. Lined streets, updated facilities, grocery stores with fresh produce, green space, sidewalks that felt safe. That commute taught me early. Zip code should never determine anyone's destiny. Later, as state representative and then deputy commissioner there at the Department of Housing, I learned something I wish every housing professional understood. And I think the commissioner said it earlier. You can't build communities without building trust. You can't parachute solutions into neighborhoods and expect people to embrace them. You have to sit in the living rooms, churches, school gyms, and listen to what residents say, not what we think they should say. So today, here's what I'm grappling with. How do we increase affordable housing in Connecticut without repeating the planning mistakes of the past? How do we create mixed income, mixed opportunity neighborhoods without uprooting the very folks who built the community? And how do we scale supply while honoring culture, memory, and texture? And I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do know this. We cannot be timid, we cannot be neutral, and we cannot prioritize comfort over justice. Let me tell you about someone who shaped my understanding of what community really means. Her name was Miss Johnson, one of the matriarchs of our block. She'd sit on her porch or her steps, I would say, because we didn't have porches in Westbrook Village, like a neighborhood historian, watching kids, mentoring teens, and checking on elders. And one day she told me, she said, this neighborhood raised children before the system even knew our names. That hit me because it was true. It's still true in communities across the state of Connecticut. Housing shapes our community every day. It dictates who stays rooted, who's forced to move, and who has the chance to build wealth, something my own upbringing showed me we desperately needed to protect. If I could write the future story of my community, Hartford, Windsor, the North End, Connecticut as a whole, it would go like this. Every child grows up in a stable home with access to a great local school. Every senior ages with dignity, surrounded by neighbors, not isolation. Every returning citizen comes home to opportunity, not barriers. Every family, whether they lived here for generations or just arrived, has a real shot at prosperity. Every neighborhood across the state becomes a place of safety, pride, and possibility. Housing wouldn't just be the backdrop, y'all. It would be the engine. And so Connecticut, all of our partners on this call, we stand at a crossroad. The story of our state in 2065 is already being written right now by the choices we make in spaces like this. So the question before us that I want y'all to remember is simple. Will we be courageous enough to build a Connecticut where opportunity lives everywhere, not just in certain zip codes? I believe we will. I truly do. And because the places we build shape the people we become, and when we build boldly, equitably, and intentionally, we build a future worthy of every community in this state. Thank y'all so much for this opportunity of sharing my little piece of my story with so many on this call. Thanks again.
Thank you, Brandon. I see that I don't have to ask people to put their love in the chat. It's already happening. Um, Y'all, I asked Brandon to be at the end of this agenda because I knew this was going to be an impossible act to follow. And you make it look easy to tell a story that weaves together past, present, and future. But let me assure everyone on the call, it's not as easy as it looks. So thank you for such a thoughtful and personal story. I really learned a lot. Everyone, can we get just one more round of virtual applause for all of our storytellers today? We've heard from Nandini, Commissioner Mosquera Bruno. We've heard from Carlene Charmelis, from Carla Weil, and Brandon McGee. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling extremely full from these stories. And I learned a lot that I would have never really thought to ask specifically about, which to me is one of the beauties of this art form. So thank you all very much for sharing your story. There's only really a few minutes left in the session. And so we're going to switch gears just a little bit. Uh, Originally, what I was going to ask folks to do was to get into breakout rooms of 5 to 6 people. And have folks tell their stories. That's still what I would like for folks to do. I'm thinking that probably in those breakout rooms, we're only going to have time to hear maybe 1 or 2 stories. So if you don't feel like telling your story today, you can breathe a little easier. You've made it safely through this session. But if you are feeling brave and like you want to share a story, there's a little bit of time for you to do so. The stories that I'm going to ask you to share do not have to be polished. What we're going for today is authenticity. And what I would encourage you to do is take, since we're pretty low on time, take 3 or so minutes to tell your story. I'm going to put, if you have a story about the prompt that we use today is what's something that housing leaders, the next generation of housing leaders in the state of Connecticut should know. If that prompt inspires you, you can use it. But I'm also going to put a few prompts in the chat that folks can use if they prefer. And finally, I would highly recommend you have a timekeeper in your session, someone who's designated to mark the 3-minute stamp. And finally, there's no need for us to respond in depth to folks' stories today. I encourage you to share your appreciation, but we probably won't have a lot of time to ask a lot of follow-up questions or like reflect on what people are saying. So yeah, I'm asking folks to share their story, and then we'll probably move on from there. So that was a lot of me talking. Go ahead and I think folks are going to be able to select their own breakout room. We're going to try to keep breakout rooms to around 4 or 5 people. If you are not able to find a breakout room with that few people, feel free to come back here and we'll help to sort you out. But again, we're going to try to get maybe like 2 stories, 2 3-minute stories in these breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together and conclude our session.
Everyone's come back, Johnny.
Awesome. Thanks, Kayla. All right, y'all. Well, as someone who's been ripped out of a breakout room myself, I know how frustrating it is to be in the middle of your story. You've just worked up all that confidence, only to be pulled back into the main group at the last minute. So I'm sorry to interrupt what I'm sure were some really great stories, but I did want to wrap this session up. I just want to say thank you again to all of our amazing storytellers today. I think that you all, exhibited an amazing level of skill and courage in your storytelling abilities. You certainly inspired me. And I hope that the folks who participated in this session, that you feel inspired too, to tell your stories, to meet folks at the throughout the conference, and to form connections through this powerful art form. And thank you especially to all of the folks at the Partnership for Strong Communities, Danielle, Kayla, for helping me to put this session together, Carla for inspiring it. I certainly learned a lot, and I can't wait to hear all of the stories that we didn't get a chance to tap into today. So thank you everyone so much for being here.